on WFLA Now. Feel good and live your best life with Bloom Health Club. Here's Gail Guayardo.
Hello, everyone. Today we are talking relationships with the man who authored Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex, Matthew P. Hoffman. Matthew, welcome to Bloom.
Love being on Bloom and hanging out with you guys.
All right. And the Bloom Health Club, this is really exciting because you have already worked with our digital reporter and producer,
right.
Brody Waddell. You guys did an article. Tell us a little bit about the article. What was it called, Brody?
It was about how to know if you're ready to get married.
Yeah, we're going to get to that too a little bit later because it's going to be our opportunity, Matthew, to probe Brody and find out what's going on in his personal life. But let's talk about what you're an expert at, and that is relationships. You started a podcast with your wife, Kickass Nation, Couples Nation, and you talk to a lot of experts, and you have for many years now. And today we're just talking about, how our relationships can either make us or break us, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, it's the light. A great relationship is the center of. We have this concept, Gail, called relationship spillover, and that's when your relationship has so much good stuff going on in it that it spills over into every other area of your life, your career, your community, and that's where everybody really wants to be.
I want to talk about winning at life, marriage, and sex because Matthew, who's been an expert on Bloom, which is our show headquartered in Tampa, Florida, it's syndicated. This is the Bloom Health Club. We talk about relationships and pillars in relationships. So, I think it's something that we're all striving for, just to see it last.
Yeah, we don't just do this because it's something we have to do, right, Gail? Hopefully it's something that we want to do. And I think that people, when they say I do at marriage, they say all the things that we're going to do and that we're going to make it work. But then nobody ever talks about how are we going to get there? Yeah.
And then, Brody, I know that, you are much younger than Matthew and myself. We don't need to get into the details of just how much younger you are, but you're younger and you kind of bring a fresh perspective to this. Do you have questions from your vantage point?
In terms of the marriage or just relationships in general?
Relationships or either or.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, man. You would probably have an aneurysm to hear about my dating life. I do absolutely everything wrong. Well, first off, how do you know when you have even a good match in someone? I've found there's something interesting to me over time that I've realized. I can't remember who said it, but they said that people can hide who they are very well for the first 3 months of a relationship, sort of be on their best behavior. Have you found that to be the case, and why do we do that, and how can you see through that?
I think everybody likes to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward. It's kind of like first date interview when you're in a new job. Everybody wants to be perceived as, intelligent and beautiful and like they're the one. And I think what comes out over time, Brody, in 2 months, 3 months, is people start to figure out who they are. And those feelings come out of what happened when they were kids or happened in a previous relationship. And when the truth comes out and you're sharing more from your heart is when things get more vulnerable and interesting, if you're willing to go there. But not everybody's willing to get deep. And I think that's why relationships can stay surfacey and stay on that same level, hey, nothing's changed in 3 months. I don't know much more about you.
Yeah.
Why don't I? And it's usually because people aren't willing to speak from their heart, scabs and all, good stuff and some of the challenges.
So how do you take the deeper dive, like Brody's saying, where it takes the 3 months they can act, they can put on a good show, but if it stays surfacey for too long, could that be a red flag?
For sure, because I don't know about you guys. But as you get more mature in dating, and Brody, you look like you're a mature young man, so I'm going to assume you are at that level in your life right now. You start to figure out what you want and what you need and what you like. And if after 3 months you're thinking, wow, I don't know this person any better, or I don't know anything about them, then you're going to be more reserved and not willing to share of yourself and be vulnerable, because no one wants to be vulnerable when they know they're not going to be cared for or respected, or when they're not going to get it back from the other person.
Right. Yeah. So, isn't there something to be said, though, for trying to be on your best behavior sometimes? There's so many of us that have baggage or maybe mental illnesses with dating. How do you, my question is, how can you, pick up on that almost before you get in too deep?
So I think one of the things I talk to a lot of couples about is how do they treat others in the small things? Like you're in the grocery checkout line. How do they treat the person that's ringing them up? How do they treat the person that brought the car or the server? If you're seeing kindness and understanding and gentleness and concern, when the person you're with is genuinely concerned of the well-being of people in general, and you see that respect, I say yes, sir, for example, to someone that's 30 years younger than I am. Not because I have to, but because I think it's the right thing to do. And all those little things are kind of telltales about how they're going to respond to me. And so it's like, faithful over the small things, right? You're faithful over the big things. And so the red flag, I think, is when you're not seeing those things demonstrated that maybe you take for granted or you expect. That's a huge red flag.
Matthew, what made you decide to write the book? Because I remember when I first heard about it a few years ago, Kickass Husband, I was like, that's a catchy name. I know your wife helped you come up with it, but why did you guys decide to get into this?
She did come up with it. I had some ideas. So I'm in an accountability group, Gail, and it's called Kaizen. And Kaizen is the Japanese word for continuous improvement. We get together once a month for half of a day, and we go deep on business, on spiritual, on faith, and personal things. And I would talk about what I was doing in my relationship or telling them they were having issues with girlfriends or spouses. And I would give them, and they go, man, nobody knows or does what you do. You ought to write a book. When your friends tell you how to write a book, you're like, yeah, I don't think so. But that happened for a long enough time. So I just started taking notes. And then I wrote the book, and it had a totally different name, The Husband Quotient. And my wife's like, what the heck is that?
What does that mean?
What's a quotient? She goes, you don't want to be a quotient. She said, you want to be kick-ass. And I went, wow.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I go, what do you think I am? And she said, absolutely you are. I wouldn't be with you if you weren't. And so that's kind of how the book got birthed. And I finished the chapters and brought my co-author, Chris Cambus, in. And we had a lot of fun doing it. It's a lot of work, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it sounds fun. And I know, Brody, you want to take a deep dive in because this is the platform here in the Bloom Health Club where we can get a little bit edgier. And you had a question, quite frankly, that I am very much looking forward to the answer to. And that is, what happens when libidos don't match up? And I thought it was interesting that you had this question because you're so young, and that I don't think that happens in the beginnings of relationships. But
well, first off, is the old joke true that it falls off when you get married?
So I wouldn't say when you get married necessarily, but I would say as we age, our bodies change, and you can get help and try to keep things. Taking care of yourself is huge, and so it changes. But I'll be open and honest with you. My wife and I didn't have an open conversation about sex, our sex life, and our desires until we were way into our marriage, and that was a problem. And so that was something I didn't know. That, hey, this is stuff you talk about. You have to say, this is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what's important to me. What's frequency, right? And men certainly want to be a lot more active than women. That's the belief, not necessarily reality. But everybody's different. So it's kind of, a lot to one may not be a lot to the other. So I think you got to have those conversations, as awkward as they sound, until they're not awkward anymore.
Right. So whose job is it to bridge that gap and really take command in the sex life? So, for example, in a lot of my relationships, I've found that the onus has almost always been 100%. And this might be different with, obviously generalizing. It's been 100% on me to lead and figure that out. And in most of my relationships, they're like, here it is, figure it out. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you need to figure it out for what I like and what will work.
So it's interesting. So I'm not going to answer your question with a question, but I'm going to say, to me, leadership is about willing to model how something should happen. It's not doing it, and it's not a command and control idea of leadership, right? It's, I'm going to show you what to do by doing it the right way. And so for you to lead in your relationship relative to the physical intimacy side is to have the conversation and say, you know what? I want to know, what do you like? What's your most favorite? What just gets you the most excited? Or conversely, what do you hate? Because if you're doing something and approaching in a certain way that you think you're trying to be a mind reader, that never works. But don't you want to know from the horse's mouth, have them go, wow, I really appreciate it when. I love it when you. And then you can say, you know what? I'm going to share with you. This is what's important to me. This is what I need to feel loved, cherished, fulfilled, turned on, whatever it might be. And those conversations are easy to have when you have a foundation, or what I call a safety net of commitment. When there's no commitment, having a conversation like that is going to be scary as heck. Because what if they don't receive it well? What if they don't love me? What if they turn tail and run the other way? But when you have commitment in a relationship, you can have those conversations because you're not worried they're going to turn and run or walk or cut you off at the knees for feeling a certain way.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm going to take it now from the having been together with the same person for decades. Sometimes you can have those conversations until you're blue in the face, and they really don't. It doesn't really change anything. Like, I feel like, a relationship does start off with all of these like firecrackers and all these different things, and it's all so exciting. But to your point, as you age and people change, it could easily land in a place where one person's just, this is fine, this is great, this is a great relationship, where the other person still has drive. So sometimes that conversation how do you make it not an insulting conversation, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's really, Gail, it comes down to needs. Because if you love somebody, you want their needs to be met. Because if it's just, hey, WIIFM, what's in it for me, man? I want, I need, you've got to do for me. When it's always one-sided, that gets old real quick. And even though, to answer Gail's question, when one person's happy and the other one may not be, or maybe not as fulfilled, you can say, I need to tell you, this is what I need. So if you communicate your needs to your partner and they're not willing to fulfill them, that's not love. That's not commitment, or it's being lazy and saying, well, you know what, you get what you get and you're going to have to just accept it. Think about that. I mean, and it's funny, if your partner came to you and said, I've got real financial concerns, Gail, and oh my gosh, do we have enough money? Are we going to go broke? Are we going to make it? And if you responded to them and said, you know what, deal with it, figure it out, you get what you get, I'm taking care of it, you don't trust me, that's too bad. It sounds horrible when you say that.
Right.
So when you come to your partner with the needs and go, this is what I need to feel sexy and to feel attracted and wanted, it's no different. You wouldn't go to them and say, I'm not going to have open disclosure with you. I'm not going to share with you how I feel, or forget it. You're going to have to just figure it out. It sounds terrible, right? So you have to have that consistency about attraction, about sex, about intimacy. And on the topic of intimacy, Brody, it is... women and men look at it very differently. Men are like, experience. I want to, what am I doing? What am I feeling? And action in the moment. And a woman is, I got to be emotionally intimate first before I want to be physically intimate. And so that's kind of the rub. The guys are like, foreplay, what's that? Let's go. I'm ready now. And women are like, wait a minute, you haven't even told me you love me today. And
do you feel that is the case with today's modern woman?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously different strokes for different folks, and I can only generalize so much, but like, it seems to me, yes, you talk about that, but it seems like you're asking for an awful lot of emotional and empathetic intelligence on your own part to even know what it is that we want and what really does it for us. So for like couples or people that really struggle to communicate really openly about that, how do you like bridge that gap? Not beyond just like being shy about it.
Sure. Well, there's something that, we talked about Gottman a lot. And the Gottman, that name, if you all know, they're John Gottman and Julia's wife. They're kind of the godfather and godmother of relationship therapy. And they do training and great resources. And there's something called the soft startup, right? Like, hey, I want to talk to my wife, my partner, my spouse, or whoever I'm dating about something that's sensitive. So you got to make sure, I can't just open the door and go, we're going to talk about our intimate life right now, right? And I'm catching her.
Okay, good. Now, so now you're talking. So it's the soft start.
Yeah, you got to, in other words, if it's it doesn't have to be marriage, but Brody, if you're approaching that woman and saying, you know what, I've been thinking about some stuff lately, and I love to have when would be a great time for us to kind of have a more serious conversation, or da-da-da-da-da. And they may say, right now, and then, okay. Or you want to make sure all your physiological needs are met. Are they hungry? Are they angry? Are they lonely? Are they tired? If any need's not being met, to have a serious conversation, you're focused on your need, not on the topic. So timing is huge. And the soft startup is, hey, I'd love to have some time, just the two of us, to talk about a few things. When would that be best for you? Right? So you're setting, and then they're going to go, well, what do you want to talk about, or what, right? Yeah. So, and you're kind of wading into it, right? You don't jump in the freezing ice water all at once unless you want a big shock. but if you work your way into it, it's a lot easier to take.
Yeah, I'm still one of these people that listens to terrestrial radio, and I don't just, stream my music. I love to listen to the morning shows. And I was listening to a lot of people calling in or texting in, and I think that people buy into complacency, like they're okay with this is just good enough. Like I was shocked at the number of people that phoned in. It was Owen the Freak Show that I was listening to that phoned in or texted in, and they were just okay with well, we're married now. Like we're kind of like roommates now. And it was a lot. It was more common than the people calling up wanting to do something to fix the relationship. And so why do you think people throw in the towel? And they're like, can you ever get it back once you've gotten into that mind frame of like, meh, well, we used to have sex and now we don't. I mean, can you ever make a U-turn and go back in the other direction?
Absolutely, Gail. It is never too late. And it's never too late when both partners desire to have it, right? And think about an aircraft carrier, right? If you're on an aircraft carrier and you're going 10 knots in one direction, you want to turn around and go the opposite way, it's going to take a long time to get there. You can start turning, but it's going to take a while before you see that ship start to turn. It's no different in relationships. And I think we become comfortable, and you said the word complacent. We're happy with good enough, right? And I say this all the time, but I swear it's true. I never thought my relationship with my wife could be as good as it is. Like it's better than I thought it would be. And the only reason it's there is because we are both committed and constantly trying to make it better. We screw up. We get angry. We ask for grace, and we have to forgive each other all the time. Those things happen, but it's that constant. We're trying to make it new. We're trying to it's not, it's Tuesday night and we're in the bedroom, so we know what that means. It's that. Nobody wants that. That's kind of like but spontaneity. And, when you're used to something, being spontaneous is hard because you're working all day, or you came home, or the kids are driving you nuts, or something went wrong at work, or your own family. You're dealing with parental issues and family of origin stuff. So it is easy to not resist and kind of go with the flow. But that's not a great flow to be in.
So how do you deal with like differences in libido? Because I know that it fluctuates all the time. But there's some people that seem to be inherently lower libido, and some that are higher libido. And I saw somewhere that it's a good question to ask right up front, like what is the amount that sort of like a number value that you need to assign to it that you would be happy with. And that people who are like low libido will be like, oh, just whatever, I go with the flow, like whatever's fine. But people who it matters more to can almost actually give you a number. If they really think about it, be like, actually I would like twice a week, once a week, couple times a month.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's desire, right? And that's kind of that, we talked about that communicating your desires earlier. I have a friend, he has a 48-hour rule with his wife. Like it's a minimum of every 48 hours. Really? In other words, it can't go more than 48. So, and because he has they're in their mid 30s, and he has a very high libido, and he's a physically fit guy, working out hard, big, whatever you want to call the reasons. But his wife knows that, right? And so he said, that's what I need. Now, if someone says I need a lot less, that's fine too. And there's a lot of things, I don't want to get into specifics, but there's a lot of things that partners with different levels of libido can do so they're both happy.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that. The hard and fast rule, I kind of like that idea of just setting down your expectations. I mean, obviously if that person's sick or whatever, but I wonder about this being an issue because so many women are getting into hormone replenishment, as it were. They're realizing that walking around with low testosterone, low estrogen, low progesterone levels is not healthy. And, gone are the days of these weird synthetic drugs that were not good for women. Now they've done this bioidentical, and a lot of women are subscribing to this. We hear about it on our show all the time. And it does make me wonder what happens as you age, because to hear somebody your age say that someone doesn't have a libido or whatever, that would be shocking to me. But as you get older, testosterone levels drop, people aren't equal. So sometimes it's a medical issue in addition to a desire issue. And I wonder what happens with this lack of balance.
Yeah. Well, it's important, intimacy is not perfunctory. It's not like, well, you do it because you have to. You should want to do it. I have a friend who's a doctor and he works with men and keeping them physically fit and healthy. He was 77, not the doctor, the man. And he said, you know what, doc, I got a problem. I need more testosterone. He said, why? He said, because we're not doing it 3 times a day like we used to. This is somebody in their 70s, and you're like, what? 3 times, And so he was like, okay, that's your goal. I'm going to try to help you get there. And they took the steps, and he came back a month later, and he said, man, we're back on normal pace. Life is good. So for him, that's normal. And for us, we're like, are you kidding me? That's crazy, right? So everybody has to find what they need. And if there's a huge discrepancy, it's more like, how are we going to get those needs met? Because here's the last thing I want to say, that I have to share with you is, intimacy and sex you want to have connected, eye to eye, face to face, not separate, not using an artificial sense, because having kids that have gone through this and grown up, I get concerned because everything is available whenever you want it, right? And what you bond with, what you have that experience with is what you bond with, what you're attracted to, and you don't want to become reliant on something other than your partner for intimacy and satisfaction. So having the personal nose-to-nose, eye-to-eye connection is huge. And that's something I learned later on as well, but constantly work to reinforce, to make sure that we are each other's only source and major source of that connection.
So we're talking clearly, or are we talking about porn? Are we talking about how that dilutes relationships and marriages and sets up expectations that are not realistic?
Absolutely. I mean, because
that's how I feel.
Oh, it's totally. First, porn is totally unrealistic, and there are no innocent players. I think, young kids probably don't realize that a majority of the men and women that are involved in that industry are not there because they want to be. Or because it's what they love. Some, I'm not saying they all hate it, but there's a lot of victims, and it's often human trafficking, it's often prostitution, it's often drug addiction. There's so many other things. It's not it's not somebody selling a hamburger on the corner that's trying to make a buck by selling it for $5 instead of for $2.50 at McDonald's, right? So I think it's a very pernicious thread that can weave through society, and it destroys relationships all the time. Because, like you said, Gail, it's not realistic. It is so fantasy driven, and if you're expecting that, here's the danger, honey. How come you're not doing that for me? How come we don't? How come those things don't happen?
I mean, I'm sure I sound like a prude over here, but I do have 4 daughters, and I am concerned of today's man because it is so you can just log on. It's so easy. It's free. Like, you don't have to go into some shady place and go through the Be Kind Rewind era of where you're seeking it out. You're bringing it home. It's an effort to get it. It's just right there. And I do worry, for adult women my age and their spouses. And I also worry about having 4 daughters and, men having such access to this. But that's probably for a whole another edition of the Bloom
A lot of these
Health
women
Club.
are watching too. Like, I've been blown away by how many girls have
Really?
told me that
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Participated.
That you're
Are those
definitely right.
things in that where you're like, well, that's pretty intense. Where to them is like what they want, if that makes sense. Without me being too specific, there's like some things where I'd be like, this is like I would not be cool with this, and then they're like, this is like part of like just like my toolbox.
As in the toolbox to
What they want
to
to get their satisfaction.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huh,
If
that's
that makes
interesting.
sense.
I guess, obviously it wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry unless, if only guys were watching or viewing. I mean, it's obviously women too, but to your, let's go back to what you were saying. If it's always coming from an outside source, it's almost like if you have a cat feeder, the cat will become bonded to the feeder that gives the food, and and maybe it won't pay as much attention to the owner of the cat. I think the same can happen if you're always relying on some outside source, to get your thrills and chills. You lose sight of the person you're supposed to be connected with.
Exactly. It's a substitution. I have a chapter in my book, No Substitutions, and it's not an easy thing to take, but you don't want to substitute intimacy with your partner with intimacy or closeness to something else. Anything. It could be alcohol, could be drugs, could be gambling, could be food, could be desserts, right? There's unhealthy extremes of a lot of activities, but you want to do stuff that draws you closer together. And, my wife and I tried stuff when we were younger that we thought was going to be sexy and cool, and we failed miserably. And it's very laughable now because we're like, remember when we tried? Oh yeah, we're not doing that. Or maybe we did. We came back to it and tried something, right?
Right.
So we laugh about those times, and that those are the connections and the things that we do. But I think, going back to your question is, when you have different levels, or what do you do if somebody has more than that? You got to keep pursuing your partner. You got to keep dating them. I call it eternal woo, right?
Yes.
When you know what I mean when I say woo, you're going to woo somebody. Man, you got to be, flirting, texting, suggesting, touch it. It's a ongoing. It doesn't just, I got the prize, we're married, I can chill and do whatever I want now. You got to keep being pursued, and that's what keeps it exciting and not monotonous and fun, because you're talking about and suggesting and flirting with your wife or your partner.
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk about the article that you guys worked on together that's now on bloomtampabay.com. And I was joking in the planning meeting that I was going to razz Brody and ask if he was writing it for the readers and our viewers, or if he was writing it for himself. But how to know when you're ready to say, I do.
Yeah, it was just a subject that came up that was kind of funny. My girlfriend has made funny jokes about that before, too. I can't remember what I said to her, and she was like, you're asking for wife duties on a girlfriend's salary. And I thought that was the funniest thing that she said. But yeah, like, just because some of my friends that have been together forever and they don't seem to get married, or just like in my own life, yeah, like I wanted to know like what some of the signs were of like going beyond. And also, it was interesting to me because I have like a lot of very successful friends, and like it seems like there's an extra layer of danger around marriage when you are a successful person like that. So like I wanted to really dive into sort of the red flags, the good reasons to get married, and the bad reasons to get married. So I'd love to hear you speak on that, because
Sure.
I feel like that's the elephant in the room, and it does change things.
You mean if you're rich?
Yeah. Like
what
if
about a
you're
prenup
rich,
or a
or if you're
post-nup or something with a nump?
Or still, I feel like it just changes the whole dynamic, because I've seen some of my friends who are very successful, wealthy, good looking, that were lots of friends, and then the type of people that come into their life almost seem to have
Ulterior motives?
and not that I value any one thing over, I can't be the one who assigns value, but it's almost like they have nothing but their presence and their body to offer, if that makes sense.
Right. In other words, yeah, it seems like they're trying to get into a great situation.
Men and women.
Men
I've seen
and
on
women.
both sides, and both sexualities, not just straight relationships, but gay relationships as well.
Sure. And I think, and so a lot of that, you said nothing but their body. So if you think of body and physicality, if that's the sense or the tenor of a relationship, it's like, man, we have great sex. Okay, well, you can have great sex really with anybody. I mean, you can if you invest it. But what turns good to great in intimacy is when you're connected, is when you relate on deeper levels. It's like, do you want to have one level, one layer? Do you want to have 7, 8, and 9? Right? It's because when you're so connected with somebody and feeling and sensing and emotional, man, you can have some incredible fireworks. But I think your question was more about, how do you know if someone's a gold digger, or how to, like, they're here for the party and the good stuff, but there's not much after that. And I think, a lot of that, Brody, comes down to what are people wanting and looking for, and why what's the motive, right? What's the motive? And Gail said the prenup word. I used to have really negative feelings about that, but it's almost like you've got to have pretty full disclosure in a relationship that's headed towards marriage. I got debt, I got credit, like it's a balance sheet conversation. It's like, here's all the things I have, here's all the things I don't have. I've seen it in relationships where one person comes and, there's a trust fund, and, and they talk about it, obviously. And even the parents have said, you need to tell her, or you need to tell him, that's yours. Yeah. It's not theirs. Right. And so you can have those conversations, but you need to be pretty transparent on all those levels.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the saying, my money is my money and your money is our money?
I think I'm much more comfortable with what's mine is mine, what's mine is ours, and what's yours is ours. And we make those decisions together, because my wife, before we got married, she said, I want to be at home with our kids. She said, if we can. She goes, if I cannot work full time, She did work early on, but she said, I think we both agreed it was important for one of us to be home. So just because I was the primary breadwinner doesn't mean I made all the decisions and call all the shots, because she was doing that work. I always said my wife works full-time in the home.
And that is a full-time job.
And it's harder. It's harder.
Yeah.
It's easy to leave and get the break, and then you come home and she'd be like crying kid here.
Yeah.
Like I'm done. And if I said, hey, I've been working, it's time for me to relax, that wouldn't have flied very well. So on the money issue, there might be, family history and other things that are coming there, and you have to protect and do that. And, some people say you need a prenup and you don't. And I think it can work both ways. But when it's, I have my account, you have yours, you do what you want with your money, I do what with mine, that's almost like saying I can do a lot of things on my own in this relationship, and I don't have to include you. So if you have division in the financial activities, you can have division in a lot of the other areas, and you're setting that up as normal. That's a hard thing to navigate.
Right. So on a similar note, what do you say to like age gap relationships? Apparently, I did an article. Tampa is one of the top cities in the U.S. for age gap relationships. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough,
how big is the age gap? I read the article, but I can't remember if you put
10 plus years, 15.
And oddly, women were the older ones.
There was more women in this area that were doing it, because traditionally, obviously, you think of like a man with like a younger woman.
Right.
I believe is the thing. And I've had friends that do that, or I have it, and I say things to them too. And I wonder if you agree with this. And I'll say, like, if you want a young hot girlfriend or you want a younger hot boyfriend, there's just some stuff you got to deal with. Yeah,
it is. Some of it's maturity and some of it's life stage and experience, for sure. And I have experience with that. My father's second wife is 23 years younger than him.
Oh, nice.
And he's a lot older now, and that discrepancy is huge, and it's difficult.
Is it? I always wondered about that.
It's really difficult, and they're struggling. I mean, they struggle because it's different life stages.
Because he's in his 80s?
He's going to turn 90 in March.
Wow. Wow. And so she's 70.
Yeah, 66, 67.
Pretty significant difference there.
Yeah, it is. So, and I have another family member where the husband is 10 years older. And my sister is, younger than her husband by 10, 11 years. So it can work. I think it depends on the maturity and of the people. I don't know what was the
average
bottom
age
line
gap? Like, was it 10 years? Did it work?
I think it was like 10.
Because my husband and I are,
like
I'm
15.
7.5 years older than my husband.
I'm 7 years older than my girlfriend now.
My wife's 3 days older than me.
Really?
I still call her a cougar. She didn't like that at all. No.
I don't know if I like the labels, because we don't have one for the guys. When guys like marry much younger, there's no nickname. When a girl marries younger, she's a cougar. Or, I've always felt like there have been, it's a social norm thing. It's like not normal for the woman to be the older one in relationships. It does catch people off guard, even though it's more common now.
Yeah, for sure. I think part of that's just like when we sort of like achieve success along our journeys, you know what I mean? Like for men, we kind of have to establish ourselves more to be more attractive to like the type of women that we want. I don't know if you agree with that, but just in the experience that I've seen, I've had like tremendously more success getting what I want at the older I've gotten, and the more that I've learned, and the more I can provide besides just being funny and good looking. If that
does that mean you're ready to get married?
I don't know about all that, but
I was just waiting for the moment to put you on the spot. I'm just messing with you, Brody.
I think it's funny too, but that just seems like so far off, such an impossibility to me.
Really?
I feel like a lot of people in my age range think the same thing about it. That marriage and having kids just seems like such a far-fetched dream.
It does, because kids are so expensive.
Well, yeah, because they're so expensive, and just like the dating culture these days. You guys
tell me, fill us in. What is the dating culture? Yeah, I've been out of the game for 2 decades
now. Yeah. People just are like, over the littlest things, there's almost like too much choice, and the way you go about it now, it's just like, and like you said, like communicating, people just don't really communicate. They just are willing to cut and run instead of like work through things.
I mean, what he's saying is really, really interesting, because I think, you've got a key demo audience, and, even if you're working with people in their mid-30s and up, it's different. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, maybe no matter what age you are, you're online, you're, swiping right or swiping left or whichever way you're supposed to swipe. I mean, it is different. And you do hear of a lot of guys or couples just not knowing how to move forward with their relationships.
Yeah, I think that the forever word, if I looked at you, I was going to ask you a question and say, do you ever think you could say to somebody, I'm going to be with you forever?
Yeah, sounds crazy.
Probably scares the bejesus out of
I'd
you.
like to, but it just seems like.
Do you want to have kids? I mean, do you see that, or is it just that? Is it unattainable because you're looking at it from a spreadsheet, dollars and cents, or is it or just scares you in general?
I think both, and then you also like have to be with someone where you're like, you could be like the mother of my children too. And then like you worry about that. Like there's so many of us that are dealing with our own thing that it's just, like it seems like, cause like my parents were like, my mom had me when she was like 18, so I've already beat her by like a lot. And my grandma had my mom at like 16.
Right.
That just seems so crazy now.
Right.
It is.
And they managed to do it. And I'm like, if I had that right now, there's no way I could do what they managed to pull off.
Well, the truth is that you're never, and I think you and I talked about this a little bit in your article prep, there's never an age or a bank account balance where you go, oh, we're there, right? You could say we're going to get married when we have $50,000 in the bank, or we're going to have our first kid when I've been with this company for 7 years, right? You can do all those things and you'll get there, but you're not going to really feel any differently unless you've done other work to get prepared. So there's no, and the question is, you got to kind of, I think being a parent, Gail, I'm sure you would agree, is you have to get comfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah, you do. Because I would like to have been like your situation where I could have stayed home and, raised the kids. That just wasn't an option. So I think that did I go into it thinking I can't, this is going to be really hard 4 kids later. And I'm sure there's things I wish I could have done differently, but you eventually you figure it out. I mean, you get in the trenches and you find ways to make it work. And if you love your family, it's almost like that's your inspiration to keep on chugging.
And I think I love what Gail said. She said, get in the trenches. And I talk about that all the time. It's like the person that you're going to be with is the person that you want to be in the foxhole with because they're here, they're with me, they're listening. They got my back. Like if we got to charge the hill, they're either in front of me with a shield or they're behind me pushing me, right? It's the person that I don't want to say go to war. That's not always a great analogy, but someone who's willing to be in the worst of it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to leave you. And you know that because those times are going to be there. And when you get married, it's the wedding and it's all, you don't think about when it's going to be horrible and tough and challenging. So, kind of understanding, can I count on this person to be there when things are horrible and I'll still feel good about them being next to me?
Yeah, I met my husband, I think, at the worst stage ever in my life. And I still get kind of choked up when I talk about this. He will always be the guy that will hold my hair if I'm so filled with anxiety that I'm like throwing up, or whether I'm flying on all cylinders. Like he's always been the guy in the trenches with me during the good times and the bad times. And not that I'm anything of a relationship expert, but I can tell you that knowing that from right out of the bat makes all the difference in the world, because he's always my guy. I mean, when you hear, I got a guy, I'm married to him. And, and that does make a big difference to know if someone's going to be standing there, because you don't always have rainbows and unicorns in a marriage.
No, life is going to change. Circumstances are going to change, but the knowledge, and I think we've reached the relationship, Brody, that I want everybody. The reason I do what I do is I want to help every relationship, every couple get to the point where they go, I know they're going to be there for me. It's the commitment's not even a question. I don't doubt. I don't wake up and go, man, is she going to be with me another day, another week, another month, another year? Yeah. It's totally off the table because she's demonstrated time and time again. So that's a huge comfort and knowledge, and that gives me wings to try to do more what I want to do, and to be, because she looked at me the other day. We were talking about something new we were trying to do. She goes, I don't care if it works or it doesn't work. She goes, I'm not going to love you any less. Right? And if we fail together and we'll figure it out, right? That's what you want to hear. And I'll swing this right on back. That is sexy. That's attractive. When someone is like, man, in your worst mistake, in your most horrible moment, they're looking at you saying, I am here and I love you more than I ever have. That's attractive. And that's like, wow, I've got somebody who is here and no matter what.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up this conversation. I think we've touched on so much. It's been one of the most interesting Bloom Health Clubs, and we have incredible guests that come on this show. But Matthew, the Kickass husband, and your podcast, Kickass Couples Nation, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Love talking to you guys.
It was great having you. You can find this podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. And for more content like this, bloomtampabay.com. Thank you, everybody.